Nerd Sports Podcast, where we talk history of the game, numbers and stats. And each week we highlight a charity that's doing good. If you haven't subscribed yet, then you should, because I'm this the real deal. And you know I gotta shout out the Buffalo Bills. Turn it up to the max, sit back and relax. This the Buffalo Nerd Sports Podcast. Let go!
Hey, what is up, Bills Mafia? Welcome into another episode of the Buffalo Nerd, your home for Buffalo Bills football with a charity on top. Brought to you by Minute Media and Fansided. So, we were going to do this episode a little bit earlier in the week. I kind of wanted, I was going to do draft one and kind of go from there, but I thought it'd be more fun to just kind of take the time, let the whole draft play out, sit on it for a moment. So it's Sunday morning. It's May 1st. Welcome to May. For those of you that are just joining the show for the first time, thanks for listening in. Thanks for being here. You picked a good day to come, as we're going to break down what just took place in the draft, and we're going to kind of talk about some stuff that's coming up in the future. For those of you that have been listening, part of the Nerd Mafia the whole time, thanks again for being here. Appreciate you folks as well. So before we get into the draft and all the stuff and, the kind of proverbial pat on the back a little bit even, because we pretty much called the draft on what was going to take place and what the team needed to be do. I mean, it was pretty much writing on the wall, I think, for most folks. But needless to say, or nevertheless, I was correct. We went cornerback in the first round. But before we talk about that, like we do every week on the show, we do like to highlight a charity, just to find an organization that's doing good out there, much like the Bills Mafia does all the time, there to help each other out. So I'd like to find an organization each week to kind of highlight that's helping out their communities and or the nation and or the world and or whatever it may be, just doing something cool. So this week is actually National Infertility Week, right? So I have some close friends that, I've had to deal with this, and I have, a new coworker that I just met also has gone through this. So I wanted this week to highlight the National Infertility Association. You can find them at resolve.org. So that's resolve.org. It's resolve.org. Cool organization. All about helping folks who are, kind of battling through this, that want to have families and want to have children and just, can't, without some kind of support. So there's ways on here for you to, take action and help out. There's ways for you to get help and find out, support things in your local community. It's a cool organization. It's not necessarily, something that is like one of those things that like everybody's talking about, or there are things that are way worse. There's people dying from diseases and things of that nature. But for the folks that want to have families, new families, it's a new school era, and there needs to be help out there. And there's organizations like this. Very cool organization. They've been around since the 70s, so this isn't new to them. So if you're looking for support in this regard, somebody that's just been through it, or you're a case that's made it through it and you've had children off of it and you want to donate to an organization that's all about supporting others, here we go. Resolve.org. So let's talk about this draft, because for me, this episode is a brilliant weekend for Bean. This offseason for him has just been, everything feels so deliberate and very well thought out and planned. I mean, it's just been a great offseason so far. Now, it's all got to play out on the field, but checking the boxes, filling the positions, the defense and offensive line were pretty much addressed during the offseason before we got into the draft. We did see a little bit of, movement there. And of course, they're going to go after some undrafted guys too. We're starting to see some of those guys trickle in too. I think everybody, myself, I've been chatting about it for roughly 6 weeks now, that I didn't see anything else possible but the cornerback taking place. And, to me, it's the biggest need, obviously. I mean, when you're unsure about what's going to take place with Trey, I anticipate he'll be back, but is that going to be full form? Is he going to get full preseason? And if he's not, is he really going to be game ready? So there's big pieces to that puzzle, and it's a young room, and it's staying young. 2 cornerbacks drafted, obviously. Elam out of Florida. I think everything I've read off of him, he's going to be a phenomenal pickup for the team. The line of make sure that the playbook's on the plane. I mean, I think there's just really this ties in everything that Bean and McDermott have been building, trusting the process. It's high character guys. It's guys that want to come to work. It's a tough place to live sometimes, and it's a smaller market. So you need to find guys that are really ready to grind and be part of a team atmosphere. So no way around it. They move up. What I haven't seen anything about it yet. I would imagine that eyes were starting to get pretty wide when the McDuffie kid from Washington was starting to fall, and he was within 5 picks of us. I was getting pretty excited because I was like, "There's no way we're gonna get like possibly like the third best cornerback this late. He's just gonna fall to us." Kansas City comes up, makes a move they need. I a little surprised by that actually because they lost their safeties. They didn't necessarily lose their cornerbacks, even though they're not that good in that position either. I thought safety would have been more appropriate, but they go up and they take him, and then you're going to yourself, well, still, you're talking about getting one of the top 4 cornerbacks in the draft class. The Bills move up, which, I mean, you had 8 picks. 7 of them were via a trade. That's what I'm talking about when I'm like, Bean had such a good weekend. Like they moved around, they just did very good things. I don't know. We've talked about it all off season that a lot of these guys aren't going to stick, right? Or they're going to get just put on the practice squad. We'll see if they can stick around, or they might get plucked from the practice squad. We've been seeing that happen to a lot of our picks in the past. A lot of that is just try to get intel on what the franchise is doing, but also because you got quality players. But for me, it was coming into this draft. I thought the cornerback was 100% of need. They address it. I still am going to stick with, I think that we are going to see a veteran cornerback possibly be brought in before this is all said and done. Like I just mentioned, that's a very young room still. And then on top of that, there's some of the undrafted guys that are trickling in. They're still looking at cornerbacks. I think they're going to do a big reshuffle of what's been taking place on the practice squad and who's kind of there and open things up. Cam Lewis has been around for a while. It might be time to see if there's something else out there. I mean, this Benford kid that was drafted, later on, maybe he's now that guy that's going to be sticking around. So to me, they address the cornerback position, but it's still very, very young. And if Trey's not 100%, he can teach a lot of the stuff from off the field and how how he game plans and how he views things. He can do all that. But a lot of times you hear NFL players say that they see it when they're in the game, right? Okay, now I see what they're doing to us. They actually have to be on the field and watch it happen in front of them. So he might not be able to do that initially. So I'm not going to be stunned if there's still another guy that comes in and we still have to look at potentially making that Jordan Poyer contract work out. So we move into the second round. I think a lot of fans, a lot of talk over the leading up to the draft was the Bills needed a running back. That's probably the guy in the first round. They actually move around a little bit, and they get the guy in the second round in Dalvin Cook's little brother. James Cook comes in. Definitely the speed we've been looking for. And it's going to be fresh, young speed. I mean, I know we brought in Breida last year who had speed. He was actually like one of the fastest guys on the team, but he really didn't get on the field because he didn't have like that kind of package of being able to catch the ball really that great and every that. He was the speed to the edge that we were looking for. And then Singletary brought his game up. But him coming in, he's going to be on this roster. He's going to make a difference. I think you can split him out. I think you could teach him a lot of things. Early report and only kind of knock I've heard on him is that pass blocking might be a little bit of a challenge, but also this is a rotational backfield. I don't think you're going to see, he's not like being brought in to just be the one guy, right? He's going to be the edge guy probably, and he's going to be that guy catching the ball out of the backfield. If you watch some of his highlights, the wheel route, I think he's got great speed to make that a nice option, and he can catch the ball. So, and you have to love too that this is a guy who's the brother of a stud. I mean, Dalvin Cook is a monster. He's been doing it in this league year after year after year. So now you're going to get his little brother who's going to be probably training with him all the time, which he probably has been already, right? But you're getting a very good football family at this point, right, to kind of bring into the building. So this was a nice move. I mean, we really brought this up all off. It's like, this is not a team that needed a lot. So that, like we saw last year, we had probably the first 3 picks kind of were contributors. That might be the same this year. Top 3-4 guys might be contributors. The other guys might not be. They might not make it. This is a deep team. So this is a nice pick. I mean, yes, we brought in Duke Johnson, but he could also stick to this roster, but that could also just be we weren't sure that we were going to be able to draft this. And now that we have, he might be the guy out. Maybe Moss is the guy out now after a couple seasons. It wouldn't cost a lot to make that happen, but then we lose that kind of bruiser. So I think this is more of just a common theme of what we're doing. We're building depth at positions that are coming up. I mean, Singletary is going to be in a contract year, after next season here. And so you have to start just kind of thinking about stacking back up. I mean, you see, they've already signed another undrafted running back to bring in and work with as well. I mean, you need backs, you need things to happen, you need bodies for camp, and maybe you hit. But this is a very nice pickup. Now, the third round, I think this pick isn't getting a lot of love everywhere. I think that for me personally, I really do think that it's a good pick because of I was mentioning coming into the draft that I think we do really need to address linebacker. I mean, you lost Klein. Not that he was like all world kind of player or whatever, but he was good on special teams and he could step in, and they had found a role, for him. So I think that it's important to keep stacking that. And then potentially Draymond, we don't know. We know that they love him, right? They talk very highly of him. But I think most people do that when you're, the guy that's the guy for the franchise, that you pretty much are doing that anyways, because you don't want to talk badly about your own guys, right? So for me, this is an important decision that's being made because yes, maybe he doesn't turn out to be what we want. Maybe somebody offers him more money than we can offer him. That has to really come into play. That is something that could absolutely happen. I mean, you're looking at a guy, unless you do it in the season, which I would imagine if they decide he is going to be the guy moving forward, that they do try to get it done in the season later in the year, because you might be able to get a little bit better of a deal and you keep him out of the market because he puts up a ton of production and he's young. I mean, you're seeing that the kid that New England just drafted is 23 years old and he's just getting drafted. Tremaine's already played 4 years in the league. He's at 23, so I think that there's a certain value in really having that mapped out, but he might just say, hey, I want to see how much I could be paid. And then he might not be here anymore. Right. So you have to start looking behind and adding depth, young depth. He's got some knocks, this kid does, size wise and things like that. But production wise, if you look what he did last year in production, 7.5 sacks, he's got tackles for losses. He had 105 tackles. I mean, he seems like a very productive player. So I think that this is a good pickup. We'll see what it translates. But remember, this is a team that not this necessarily this group of people, but in the past, we've had some luck with third round linebackers, also second round linebackers, and even first round at this point. So they have a good look at linebackers. They know what they're looking for. And I think we could be seeing a little bit of shift in what the team is going to do too. So that's another reason why you potentially see somebody like this. But like I mentioned, he's not getting the greatest of praise so far. But I think overall the team's looking good. And now we went without that fourth round pick, right? So we traded that as part of the deal to move up a couple picks to get the Elam kid, which by all means, I'm not going to doubt what Bean and McDermott have in mind. I mean, you heard them talk about the board, and there was a lot of options that they were doing, they were okay with, so they were willing to move around and see what took place, and to me, when you can do that, and you've shown me consistently that you're getting good at that, I just can't doubt that this is the kid. I mean, I've heard reports as well too coming out that despite that knee injury, if that wouldn't have happened, he was very close to the number one guy as far as what he can do. So I think you have to take that in consideration too. But up until the third round, I thought very good draft. Fourth round, we knew we weren't going to necessarily have any action. I thought kind of stacking those later picks that he might make a move back up. Obviously, nobody there that they really wanted to go for. Now, the wide receiver, it has been a position that I think everybody coming into the draft was like, there needs to be some, probably somebody added there. Now, Crowder and McKenzie and Gabe Davis and Stephon, and you got Kumaro. You still got Isaiah Hodgins in the mix, but this kid is supposed to be good. He's supposed to be good. The Shakir kid from Boise State, a lot of action, works out of the slot, which is interesting, which makes you kind of wonder what they're looking at. But this also, to me, like, because if I'm looking at it, I think Crowder probably is going to run in the slot for us the majority of the time. Especially with this introduction of OJ Howard and now Dawson Knox really coming up to the forefront, it's going to be interesting. But there's definitely some youth that needs to be found in the wide receiver room, and you got to keep it around. Like this to me feels like Gabe Davis 2.0. Supposedly now he had quite a few drops last year, but all the scouting reports that you read about him says he has dominant hands. He's very good, high catch rate. He's had great production every year that he's been in college. So he's not necessarily real quick and shifty, but he has like some good explosive speed, and he's got some decent size to him. So this is a nice move. These are the type of moves you have to look for. I mean, Isaiah Hodgins, you've kept him around. Maybe he hasn't really panned out to be what you want him to be yet. But the wide receiver room, you need so many of them, and you need different people that can do different things, right? So you have to keep as many of them kind of churning and burning through the process as you can. I think we've already brought in a couple undrafted wide receiver kids already as well. You got to churn and burn, and you try to hit. But I think this might be Gabe Davis 2.0 from what I'm reading about him. Obviously, coming from a little bit smaller of a school like Gabe Davis did, so the talent level is a little bit different. And especially getting to work with Stephon Diggs, and I've heard nothing but great things about how Crowder approaches the game, and he's had very productive seasons in the NFL too. So I really like this pick. I think that if I was going to say early impact guy that kind of surprises, he's going to be the guy that would kind of similarly to how, Gabe Davis had that first nice year where everybody thought he was going to truly break out in year two, and it took towards the end of the season for that to happen. But this is the next guy I think in line. I think this is a very deliberate pick. I think that you saw they kind of targeted him. You've also seen kind of throughout this whole process is that they went after guys that are captains. They went after guys that are leaders in their room, right? So it's not necessarily maybe that they're the all-world athlete on all levels, and there might have been an all-world athlete that was available, but it looks like they went very much like leadership and captain level type of player in the last couple drafts. And I think that's why you're seeing the big change in the culture and the guys wanting to stick around and the team being, because they're all leaders, they're builders, they're all guys that are really good at coming together. So that to me was I think realistically the first four picks that we had, not that the rest of it, I don't know a ton about the rest of the guys. I've read a lot of good things about them and vice versa. But to me, just looking at it, those are guys that can make a big impact. Bernard maybe not on the field, but I think he's immediately going to have special teams of impact, and he'll fill in that role that Klein left. But Cook is going to have a good season, and I'm very, very intrigued about Elam, because you're now talking about the last time we did this was Tre'Davious White. Right. And now you're going to have a guy across him essentially doing the same thing. SEC school, playing with elite level players. I mean, he's going up against all these wide receivers that are going high from these schools. He's going up against these guys. I think I just read this morning that it was something like they weren't even attacking him last season. So he saw very little action even, and still was dominant when he did. And when they're talking about him, is that man kind of press guy. That's what Tre'Davious initially kind of was coming out of college, and he transitioned a little bit, but I'm excited about this kid out of Florida. I think he's going to be a big difference maker immediately, especially because he might have to be in and immediately making moves. Now, Dane Jackson, I like him. I thought he did well when he stepped in, but this is going to be a different caliber of a player he's going to compete with here. And I feel like this is a guy that would have probably given Levi Wallace the boot as well if he's healthy. He has the knee thing, but from all accounts that I'm reading is he's ready to go. And I think that he would have taken either of them to school probably, and one will get number 2 CB if Tre'Davious isn't healthy, but I'm excited for him. Now, you get into the 6th round of this draft, and if you're looking up and down this roster, I mean, there's not a lot going on. I think they go out and they get the punter. The kid's supposed to have a monster leg. I read a scouting report this morning that says he's Corey Bajorges. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting because we obviously got rid of that. Right. And so the interesting thing about this kid also too, though, is that he's done kicks, he's done field goals, he's done the the kickoffs, he's done the punts, he's done everything. So I think he's a nice tool to like be able to have on your roster, right? Like you always run into that time where the kicker goes down and then the punter has to become the field goal kicker. Well, he's actually got some experience doing that. Now, the only bad thing that I'm hearing about him so far is holds. That he's not very good at holds, and he's gonna have to work on that to improve. And that was the knock on Bojo as well, was that the hold game was just not as good. Bass had a very good season last season, and it was all attributed to, not all because he's got talent and skill, but it was attributed to Hack being good at holding and being very consistent at the hold and making sure the ball was where he wanted it and how he wanted it and all that kind of stuff. So I like that they did this, because if you listen to me last year and throughout all of this, the Hack Man was always kind of on my radar of like, please don't mess up. Please don't mess up. Please don't mess up. Now this kid's got a monster leg, which should be great. Bojo had a very good leg as well, and he wasn't that great at some of the angles and things like that. So we'll see what happens. But this kid brings in some serious versatility, and he will challenge. And I won't be surprised if he does win out the job, because remember, you don't always necessarily teams draft these guys, right? You can get them undrafted or whatever, but we did it a couple of years ago with Bass, and now we potentially have our kicker for the next 10 years, right? So this is another scenario where you could potentially be pulling that off for the draft. You got a very cheap contract for the first few years. I think he is going to challenge Hack potentially for this position, but he also, if that is the case where he has trouble with the hold. And this was a 6th-round guy, that maybe there's not many teams that would be willing to take him off your practice squad, and you might be able to stack him there. But I think you're going to have to see this is just going to be a straight up battle, and he's either going to make it. They'll throw him on the practice squad just to see if he sticks around, probably. But I like it. I mean, he's got a monster leg. You're in Western New York. If he can control it and he can be good with it. But for me, you also, as the punter, your most important job is the hold, right? Or you got a backup. Maybe we go the route where we have a backup, because we do have 2 veteran, quarterbacks on the roster now, that maybe you have one of them do the hold and he never even has to worry about it. But you have to be very concerned with that, because Bass's consistency is part of that. And he was very good last year. But exciting pick. I mean, the guy says he doesn't like being called the punt god or whatever, but I mean, which I get it, because if you think back to the Raiders punter King, that was what he was all about, right? He had this monster leg. He could punt 70 yards, 80 yards, whatever. He's not even in the league anymore, right? So there's more to just being able to kick the football in the NFL, right? There's only 32 spots for a reason, and these guys have to be the best, and you have to be good at most of the time holding the ball and your job, right? So I love the pick, and I think it could be great value, and I do think he will win, but I don't necessarily want to have to worry about, which is good timing for it, because Bass will be going into year 3, right? So he's not necessarily a baby in this anymore. So he's going to have a lot more experience to it, but it's an interesting move. But I think you do. I mean, when you're talking about the back half and none of these guys might even stick, this is a very smart and wise move. They took the second punter off the board. I mean, Baltimore, they get a lot of flack for the trade that they did, but they've been a well-oiled machine for years, where they're constantly putting a good product on the field. And if they're drafting punters, I think there's reasons to see the value in doing it. So I like the pick. I brought up this guy a little bit earlier, Beneford from Villanova, a small school kind of dart throw. I think it's right up Sean McDermott's alley. They definitely are looking for more depth at the cornerback position. I think he's going to stick. If I had to guess right now, I would say he would stick, and one of these other guys like Cam Lewis or somebody like that would probably be on their way out. But I do think that he'll be around. Seems like everything you read about him, again, he's just a quality player. He's got a good attitude, work ethic, all that kind of stuff. I mean, to me, that's all we've been hearing about, right? And so, good pickup. I mean, you've heard, I think ever since McDermott came in as coach, if you go back and listen to like his first approach to the draft, that cornerback is a position you always should be drafting. You always should be looking at. You should always be adding. The game is always changing in the regard of what kind of cornerback you need. For years it was big, strong, tough press guys. Now it's big, strong, tough, fast guys, right? Because the speed in the game has changed so much. So you look for different pieces, different fills. So I think this is a good pickup, and he'll probably be around unless something really bad happens or he just really can't take that jump. But I think he's going to find himself in a good position where they've had some guys on the roster for a few years now that just haven't totally panned out, and it's probably time to give somebody else a shot to be part of it. Now, I think that, like we mentioned at the beginning of this, offensive line, defensive line was basically really addressed, in this offseason so far with what they've done. I mean, I'm sure they're going to bring in some youth. That's what they do again in round 6 when they've got, 3 picks in round 6. And they brought in a monster of a man, from Virginia Tech. Not a ton of great reports about him, but he's got versatility to play both sides. And he's a monster. I mean, I think it's 6'8", like something like that. I mean, if you're looking at it, I think this is they see what the NFL game is doing, right? They did it themselves last year when you drafted Gregory Rousseau and you go with this length and, the ends are starting to get real long and real big. Well, interestingly enough, the tackles on the other side are getting as big and as tall, and now they're getting as athletic, right? So I think this is just a monster pickup. You saw Spencer Brown come in last year and have a good season. This kid's probably not going to necessarily make any big impact this season. You probably stick him around, but he is going to have an opportunity to probably win an outside tackle backup spot, I would say. But we'll see what the plan is with Bates and things like that as the season breaks down. Maybe they decide to move him inside. I mean, if you put him next to, I think he's probably a little, the report was he has shorter arms, so maybe he is going to come inside. And then you've just got like potentially a right side that's monstrous men, who knows? And I do like the idea of really trying to find guys right now on the offensive line because you do have Roger Saffold in the building. You've got Dawkins in the building. You've got guys that have been at it for a while. I think Saffold's a great player. You don't stick in the NFL that long and have good success and be with high quality teams unless you're a good player. And I think that he's going to be a really nice player to have this year. We're making the transfer back over to Cromer running the offensive line. So, and I think there's already been a couple undrafted guys brought into. I mean, these are guys you need bodies for camp. You need to see if you can find something. But I like the pick, and they rounded it out with another linebacker out of Clemson. The team has brought in a lot of players from Clemson here in the past few years, even way back to when friggin' Feet Man was running the show, and so I think that it's a good move. It's just depth. Let's try it out, see what happens. I mean, this has been happening for a year. I mean, they just brought back Terrell Dotson. He's the same kind of guy, right? The Vance Joseph draft picks. You're always trying to find role players, backup linebackers, especially special teams guys. So all reports again, high quality player. I mean, I think if you look at the theme of the draft this year was right off the bat, the cornerback was the need. They got it. Second round, that speed that we were kind of looking for, hey, it's there. We might be able to take it. Let's do it, right? Interesting. I think that's just kind of how it was. They moved around a lot. They just kind of played the board. They went after some pieces that they needed. They know there's a lot happening, right? This roster will not turn over a ton. So by far for me, I think like brilliant weekend so far. I mean, we'll see how the undrafted thing plays out. It is always nice if you score somebody there. But all in all, you covered your biggest needs. You added some depth. I think they had a great weekend. I think that the team has been trending towards this. It's turning into, when you talk about like Bill Belichick making a crazy pick or what's perceived as a crazy pick, the franchise is really trending towards that. It just feels like this is what it's going to be every year moving forward. Your top 3 picks might be contributors. Maybe you get in somebody in the back end past that second half of that starts to contribute earlier than you planned. But I liked this draft. I thought it was well done. I think it leaves still the Jordan Poyer deal on the table. Something needs to take place there. Obviously, there's going to be some interesting things to happen with Draymond throughout the season. Depends on how he balls out this year. So it's a good draft all in all. Not that like the national reports really matter all that much or whatever, but all accounts, I didn't really see anything lower than a B plus, A minuses, some A pluses for the Bills draft in there. I mean, I think all in all, you came out of the weekend better, and that's all you were hoping to do, especially when your team's as good as it is. I did want to hit on what took place around the AFC East a little bit too, because Miami, they didn't have much to work with. I mean, they made their decisions in the offseason and they went big, Tyreek, and they've done those things. They didn't really do anything in the draft here that like was crazy, but they obviously spent their money in the offseason. You go over to New England, you can't really count them out at this point. I mean, it's going to be a new offensive coordinator this year, but it is still New England. And when they make a pick like that, I mean, it's one of those things. I know there's the stuff out there that Sean McVay was like laughing at the pick or whatever, but that was actually that Sean McVay was laughing that their GM thought that he might be around at like the 100 and something number, and then he went off the board at 29. So you can't really discount them. They still had a good football team last year. They got their quarterback last year. They're very good about just finding good free agent players. So you can't really count them out. But now these were first round picks. So it's one of those things where like you don't anticipate that it takes a lot. Right? Like you wouldn't really anticipate that it would take too much to be successful at picking in the first round, especially when you're picking high in the first round. But I've been saying for years since Joe Douglas took over with the Jets, he's a good GM. He reminds me very much of what Bean and McDermott were doing. And it appears that they're doing that. They had a very nice draft. Now, I think they're still probably a season away from really getting after us. I mean, you're talking about a second-year cornerback. You're talking now your backfield, although it's going to be good, is going to be a first and second-year guy. You've brought in 3 more rookies who will probably all contribute and be good. You got some second-year guys from last year that you invested a lot of high capital in, but it's a young team, right? And it's got to gel in the NFL. But Joe Douglas he's putting the press on in New Jersey over there. And I thought the Jets had a very nice draft. They became a little more competitive than they were for sure. But absolutely now they came back up into the first round, but they've got so much capital from what they've been doing. So I feel like if you gave Bean this pick, and this draft fell nicely for them. I mean, they got a great player in the cornerback. I think that was going to happen no matter what. And then they had another really good, they had probably the best tackle fall to them, I think. And then they come back up and they get another good player. So it's going to be a good football team, but I'm not saying that they're going to be nipping at our heels yet. I don't think they did anything in that draft to necessarily surpass us. I do love, though, and I can't wait until the first time that we play this and it happens. But the cornerback from the Jets was very stern and very confident in saying that he was going to have no trouble stopping Stephon Diggs. So we've seen what Diggs does to people that say this to him in the past. So I'm just excited to see the first time that they line up against each other. I wouldn't even be like completely surprised if it was just like an opening double move deep shot against him for a touchdown, just to be like, okay, welcome aboard, sir. No problem stopping us. But all in all, I think everything I was seeing from the Mafia, happy with the draft. National people are happy with the Bills draft. I think the team is, just in a beautiful position. You saw that they're just adding hard workers, guys that can be role players, fit in, nobody that's going to ruffle the boat. I mean, this is just, things are going well. The other big piece that I want to make sure I touch on too before the draft even happened was, which I think was an important move, is we signed Ed Oliver's 5th-year option. He looked dynamite last year, finishing out the season. If he comes in even something close to that with some new pieces in the middle, I think the Settle guy is going to really open things up for him. I do believe that Ed Oliver making that move, getting that low number, and working towards seeing what happens with him. Because you're talking about big money being paid, and then you're going to look at Traymon, you're going to be looking at Ed Oliver. These are big ticket positions that are going to cost money. So now, granted, we've built this role player thing, so it'll kind of limit that, but that could also mean Ed Oliver's out the door, right? And then we're doing the same thing that like with Jordan Phillips and Lawson happened to us before. We're back in that same boat. But Ed, I thought it was a great move. You saw it was right before the draft, also signifying that there wasn't probably going to be anything done on the defensive line. Now, once we get these guys signed and paid, I believe the moves are going to be to look at Jordan Poyer or still probably looking at seeing what the cornerback market's going to look like, because there's always veteran players that are going to sit and they're going to wait until after this draft to see what plays out, see who went where, see who still needs what. Some might sit out all the way through up until into coming preseason and camps to see if somebody goes down and a team really needs a need to increase their value, right? So I still believe that those things will happen. We will continue to be chatting about that stuff as we continue down the off season. The camps are happening. Everything's going to be taking place. It's going to be exciting to see things, hitting back to St. John Fisher this year. So really excited for this offseason. It's been great so far. I do hope that we do get this deal done with Poyer before too long. I don't want him not being around the building or turning it into some kind of affair, where they're potentially, because I'm not going to be completely surprised if they don't end up working out a deal because of the money he might command. He might look to just play elsewhere, but I don't think he's going to necessarily sit out. But I don't even want to approach that. So I'd rather just sign like a 2-3 year deal with him, keep him with Hyde, finish that out, build behind him, continue to do that. But we will see what takes place. So also some interesting news coming up, as this will be the last episode of the Buffalo Nerd on the Fansided and Minute Media platform. As of next week, we're taking the show live over on Buffalo Rumblings and SB Nation. So on Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, starting next week, the show is going to be live there. And then for those of you that can't catch the live show and join us for the chat while everything is happening, the podcast will be available on Fridays as it normally would be as we're continuing through the off season. Super pumped to join the Buffalo Rumblings team. I got some buddies over there, Joe Miller, Jay Spence. It's going to be an exciting time this upcoming off season, and offer was to take the show live on Thursday nights. So we're going to go ahead and do that moving forward this coming week. So for all of you that are normally listening, appreciate if you guys could show up on Thursday night. That's going to be 9 p.m. Eastern. You catch that on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network on Fridays, and it'll be on the YouTube video network live on Thursday nights. So come and hang out with us, chat, let me know what you think about what's going on with the team. We're going to start bringing on some guests as we move forward through this thing. We'll hit on some fantasy football, talk about the draft a little more, get into the off season, just really have fun as we kind of get through May, June, and July before things really start picking back up before we get into camp and the preseason coming our way. So make sure you guys are checking that out and looking for everything that is up with the nerd over at thebuffalonerd.com. And make sure that you guys, if you can, or if you know somebody that might be interested in it, head over to resolve.org and check them out as we're closing out National Infertility Week. It's just a cool organization. It's a cool thing. If it's something you can help out with, head over there. There's even ways for you to volunteer time, energy, all that kind of good stuff too. So want to say a big shout out to Fansided and to Minute Media for, carrying the show for the season last year. Again, it was an awesome time. Appreciate everything they did for me over there, and the guys over at BuffaloLowdown.com. But starting next week, we'll be part of the Buffalo Rumblings and SB Nation team. So make sure that you guys are heading over there and you're looking for the podcast on the SB Nation podcast network. And of course, go Bills.
Make sure you leave a review and subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll see you next time. Leg out!